Hello, you again. Welcome to the Medicine Show. In this video, I'm going to talk about natural law justice, which I am sure, for most of you, is going to be quite a bit different from what you think it actually is. So let's get started, shall we? True justice is a force in natural law, and knowing the basics on how it operates is essential to successfully applying natural law in one's daily life. More importantly, knowing the basics of natural law justice can reveal how dangerous colorable law can be to one's ability to enjoy true happiness. There are a number of symbols out there that we've seen over and over that make reference to justice. Most nowadays know it only as a vague concept, including fines, prison, or some kind of payback. Most of what we know as justice comes from some contrived fantasy television show or movie, little of which has much to do with natural law justice, especially when exercised through our corrupt legal system. Sadly, our religious institutions do nothing more than confuse or conceal the power of natural law justice. Justice itself is a force in nature, and understanding it goes a long way in revealing how and why power flows in our daily lives. The scales of justice is one of those symbols shown as a balance. In natural law, there is a force that keeps the system in equilibrium, thus maintaining that balance. The more weight, or action, on one side, the more opposite force is used to ensure the balance. That opposing force is justice. When one engages in an act that does not abide natural law, then nature applies force to return balance. The yin-yang symbol also demonstrates this balance. When force is applied in one direction on the top, an equal force is applied at the bottom, in the opposite direction, and vice versa. Here is another symbol that shows that this principle is recognized as a well-established natural law principle. Does this symbol look familiar? There is another symbol called Lady Justice, and I'll let you research that symbol on your own. This principle of equilibrium is also well known in physics, and few would question the truth of it. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. When we proceed through our life experience, we see this law in physics expressed through natural law. We need to realize that it does not stop with billiard balls and celestial objects. When we act, there is a reaction that we will call cause and effect, or cause and consequence. Consequence, con, or opposite. Sequence, or series of events or occurrences. Consequence. Simply letting the round weight go in this graphic kicks off a series of effects and consequences. Causation is who or what actually set the consequences in motion. Here, releasing the ball caused the lever to go down on one side and up on the other. That consequence then created injury to the man looking away. Cause is the hand that released the ball. Injury is the deprivation of rights against the informed and responsible will of another. If you deprive one of one's property right, including their body, then that creates an injury. Notice that the words informed, responsible, and will are highlighted. Informed. Are you given all the information so you can know the effects and consequences? Did you ask? Say someone is holding an object that you have not seen before. It is prudent to ask, is it dangerous, before asking, can I hold it? If you don't ask, then you take all responsibility and it is your own fault. In this case, you committed the action, and the man holding the object simply allowed you to do so. If it is dangerous, and you get injured, then I will go into that a bit later. Responsible means, are you capable of responding in such a way to subject yourself to effects and consequences that you are willing to experience? If yes, then you are responsible. If you cannot respond in a way to enjoy your desired consequences, then you are not responsible. I have beaten the responsibility concept to death in previous videos, so you are welcome to review it there. Returning to the man holding the unknown object story. If the man holding the object knows the object is dangerous, then he has a duty, as a responsible man, to warn you that the object is dangerous. At which point you can decide if you want to proceed, and you are responsible. If the man does not trust you to be responsible enough to handle the object, for instance, you don't know the proper way to treat the object, then he may refuse to hand it over. This is called exercising care. One who is responsible must warn others of unknown dangers and care properly for those that are not sufficiently responsible or knowledgeable to keep themselves from injury. This is why manufacturers put warning labels on their products, because many people are not responsible or knowledgeable enough to learn how to properly handle the product before using the product and have been injured using the product. If we were responsible, we would first educate ourselves on the use and care of new products that we are not familiar with. Will, or consent, means that if one is willing to waive a right, then the right is given, such that it is not against their will. The deprivation of right is done with consent, and therefore does not create injury to the one waiving the right, and so there are no consequences for the right deprivation to the one doing the depriving. Said another way, can you steal something from someone who is first willing to let you take it? That's not stealing, but rather a contract, and I will devote an entire video completely to the law of contract. So the question is, how can I know how to navigate through my life experience to enjoy the effects and consequences that I enjoy? Those who are responsible are provided a tool and resource to be able to navigate through the life experience. When we are responsible, we have a conscience. This is like a compass that tells us when we should or should not proceed with any act depending on what we want to get from the experience. Some of you remember the cartoons used to represent the conscience with an angel on the right shoulder, or right, and a devil on the left shoulder, wrong. They do not teach children that because they do not want to show us that we have that important tool. We are taught to be irresponsible, and in that way others who are responsible get the power to exercise care over us and make us do what they want us to do. This conscience is said to be in our heart, or a gut feeling, or intuition. It is a feeling that rises up from deep within us. The conscience gets its power because it's connected to on. Since on is truth, then we can discern the difference between truth and fiction by using conscience to point us in the right direction. Many have heard the saying, "Let your conscience be your guide."
When one is responsible and acting responsibly, then there is a communication link between your conscience and on, or the truth. That communication link is referred to as one being fused, or in communion, or moral. One can then know the difference between right and wrong. When that link becomes broken, and I will go into how that happens in a bit, one then loses the connection, and that is described as being confused or not fused. It is also referred to as being excommunicated or being immoral, as one cannot discern the difference between right and wrong. I know some of you have heard the term excommunicated before, and for those of you, you must understand that those who claim to communicate on your behalf do so because they have decided that you are not responsible, and therefore they have a responsibility to speak on your behalf. There is no need for this because we each can be responsible and communicate without anyone else interceding on our behalf. One who is irresponsible does not need the conscience tool. One who has willingly chosen to break the connection has no connection and no need for conscience. Those who are responsible have a conscience. And when you have one, you will truly see how it can save you from suffering. Now, here is how one can maintain the connection and how one can break the connection. The golden rule is natural law that says, "Do unto others as you would have them do to you." We decide willingly how we are treated, precisely in the way we treat others. If you are irresponsible, then you generally do not notice when this powerful law causes profound effects and consequences in your life. For some, these effects may appear as coincidence or irony. The irresponsible often cannot even see cause and effect, and I will go into that in a bit also. The thing that is important to accept about justice is there is no such thing as getting away with it. Prior permission can be granted for any act, or you may delude yourself into believing that you suffer no consequences, but every act is witnessed, and the consequences always ensue. Lying to people can create injury and therefore can bring about or manifest effects and consequences that are not enjoyable. Try it for yourself and see what I mean. So the guy on the left decides that it's okay for him to lie to someone, and that lie creates an injury for the guy on the right. Say he loses property like his house. The guy on the left who lies should expect to be lied to and lose something in return. So later, his girlfriend lies to him, and he loses both her and his house. So the guy on the left sees the golden rule play out perfectly. What about the guy on the right? Was he not cheated? How can that be justice? What about the woman on the right? Did she not get off scot-free? How can that be justice? We need to finish the entire equation because something happened before that fills in the missing factors. For this scenario to be balanced, we have to know that the guy on the right first lied to the lady on the left. And in this way, between these three people, justice is balanced. We often, through the course of our lives, simply assume that there is no justice, when in reality we do not look close enough to what occurred before and look for the complete equation. So why do I make such a fuss about lying when we're told that lying is not that bad? Well, people who are responsible know that their word is their bond. That means if they say something that is not true, then that fraud becomes a shackle or a bond. Keep your promises, because if you don't, life will become a burden. Yes means yes, and no means no, and honesty is the best policy. Test this out for yourself. So obviously, lies by themselves do not always create injury. It is the injury and not the lie that causes the uncomfortable consequences to begin or become manifest. So let's look at comedy and see this principle in action. A joke is often a lie or false story that has the effect, sometimes, of making us laugh. It's good to laugh. On has a sense of humor. Just look around. The irony is everywhere. So someone cracks a joke, but it does not become a shackle. Why? Because we have a sense of humor, we give comedians and people who tell jokes license or permission to lie, so that we can laugh. License and permission is granting consent to cancel consequences and the effects that would normally proceed from the law when the law is not abided. We want to laugh, so we decide that we are not going to be hurt by a false story. That willingness is to consent for someone to do something that would otherwise violate our rights. Attorneys practice law. Doctors practice medicine. There are marriage licenses. It's interesting homework to learn what laws would be broken if we did not give them permission. Now, if you're led by conscience to ask permission, then it's assumed you need permission. The trick here is that if you use your conscience and there's no indication that you would create injury, then you need not ask permission. When you do ask permission, then you give up your own authority and give up your own responsibility. This is why nowadays we are conditioned to ask permission and willingly give up our responsibility and place ourselves under the authority of another. It is a bad habit, and it causes suffering because many of the people we put ourselves under do not care how much they hurt us. They have all the power, and only because we automatically give them that. Let's now fully explore the joke scenario and see what we can learn from it. Someone tells you something with the intention to make you laugh. You hear the words, but It does not sound like a joke to you, and it shocks you. Is it an injury? You do not know, so you ask the guy if he is joking. Look into his eyes and rely on your conscience to see if the guy intended an offense by what he said. If he feels repentant, you will know. Good manners will cause the man telling the foul joke to tell you that he is sorry and apologize. Good manners, for you, will force you to forgive him and make you both feel at ease for the error. What if the guy intended the joke to be injurious or insulting? Looking into his eyes and relying on conscience and observing his behavior will reveal that it was intended not to be funny. Forgiveness is a powerful and important part of good manners. When one forgives, often it will cause one who caused injury to rethink their actions. If not, then you are no longer troubled emotionally by what they say or do. That's not to say you haven't lost something, but at least emotion does not become a bigger problem than the loss. If he still intended to be offensive, then you are free of it, and now the golden rule applies. In your case, you'll be forgiven for your possible error, and he can expect to be insulted by somebody else. Now, if the man felt bad for saying what he said and was repentant, and you decide to be offended anyway, then you have succumbed to a popular conditioned response called self-victimization. It is bad manners, because you are trying to exploit his repentance to gain an advantage over him. This has become very popular, as people have mistakenly convinced themselves that simply behaving like a victim gives one the power to be made whole by the supposed perpetrator. What is more troubling is that sometimes this false victimhood works for a time, and on people who cannot recognize it for what it is. It is a lie. One of the consequences for engaging in self-victimization is that you give nature your permission to actually be a victim, and soon you can expect someone to provide that service to you. And again, this occurs according to the golden rule. It is extremely bad manners and therefore creates injuries and more negative consequences. So creating an injury by lying is what we call a crime. Let's look at some crimes that create much more serious consequences. For instance, you decide to take a club and beat someone unconscious and steal his money. What can you expect? Crime proceeds through a number of steps that I will call the crime and punishment cycle. This cycle proceeds without what we call police, courts, jails, and criminal justice. Nothing happens against your will in nature. Natural law does not compel performance, meaning that if, in your mind, you decide to commit a crime, then natural law does not act to stop you. However, it must be understood that the moment you willingly choose to act in that way, then the consequences begin. At this moment, conscience will be sounding a red alert, and often we choose to ignore that warning. However, if we stop right there and listen to conscience, then we can avoid many of the consequences beyond simply being ashamed for thinking it in the first place. So through a willing choice at the time, or even because of a specific lesson you came here specifically to experience in your life, you choose to beat a man unconscious. The crime occurs in the mind, and that sets in motion the consequences of that choice. Conscience at that point is still with you. The act itself is a consequence of the inner choice. Since that act is committed and an injury has occurred, consequences begin. The other important thing that happens is that as a result of not listening to conscience, one becomes blind to the true cause of the pain and suffering. They also become confused, as explained before. One may be relying on a conscience, but that conscience no longer points to the truth. The moment the criminal act is committed, one becomes irresponsible, because a responsible man would not have committed the crime in the first place. So that the lesson becomes meaningful, one is specifically blinded to the true cause of the suffering and pain they endure, so that reconciling the error takes a specified amount of time. In that time, one may become involved with the police. They may be a fugitive, or someone else may respond by, beating them unconscious.
At some point, often after several years in confinement, one reaches a point of clarity. And over time, the details of what initiated the consequences slowly become realized. At a point after that, one becomes convicted. Don't be confused. I do not mean that a court determines that you are guilty. I mean, one realizes himself that he is guilty and feels guilty. Sometimes that takes a lifetime. Sometimes one never gets to that point. And for them, the suffering ends only with death. You can see those folks in court, those who are pronounced guilty but do not yet feel guilty. They can't feel that guilt because they have not suffered enough. After conviction, one has time to truly accept what they have done to their victim and themselves, and truly feels bad for it. One using a conscience has a way to see through those who fake repentance, because it's easy to see through action their complete surrender to their victim. It is at that point responsibility returns, and conscience is reconnected. The suffering and pain then begin to ease. The conscience then drives the perpetrator to make the victim whole and repair what he has broken. After he has made good, then he can finally get to a point of forgiveness, and the entire lesson is complete. If one decides to do the same thing over again, the consequences are much worse. Usually the first time is enough if we're paying attention. Each time the same lesson is not learned, and one repeats the lesson, they can expect greater pain and suffering, and for a longer time. It is helpful to see the cycle laid out, as it can help to identify where one finds oneself in their own cycle. Some who are watching right now have just begun the clarity phase. Most who cannot grasp what I'm talking about here have not suffered enough to reach a point of clarity. That is the good thing about suffering and pain. It does get your attention. Once clarity is reached, one has a roadmap that shows what to expect next. Just being able to see it can dramatically hasten the process. So we must realize that rights cannot be taken. We need to apply the golden rule to see when we willingly gave our rights away. Often that occurs through contract. I will do a video that will address that, but there are a few loose ends that tie up first. Contract deals with giving away rights on purpose, and much of what we went through in this video will be used there. Knowing how justice works and why is critical in taking responsibility and reducing the pain and suffering. Simply knowing that one has a conscience and how to protect it will go a long way in maintaining control over what should be a useful and wonderful life experience. See you in a bit. As always, thank you for being me.